So, Mr. Jonathan, can you please unmute yourself? This is amazing to see you, and thank you for your patience. And we will jump into the world of artificial intelligence and connectivity as such. But for the audience, this is Sir Jonathan. Sir is the title that I gave to him because the Jonathan name is such a strong name. I wish I had a stronger name than Jivak. And Jonathan leads an amazing life, and I would really want to ask Jonathan, like, you are in this world of advanced intelligence and machine learning and whatnot, and you literally stay on a homestead, 10 acres of land with furry animals and feather animals around you. Can you explain the context you go back every day to work on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. First off, thank you for having me, Jivak, and appreciate being able to chat with you. Yeah, so I live west of Ann Arbor on 10 acres of land. We've got a couple of goats, about a dozen chickens, a couple of dogs, a toddler that runs around. And actually, earlier this morning, I was looking out my window from my desk right here and watched a deer walk right across. So it's really a kind of a way for me to connect back with nature while I then spend most of my time in front of a screen professionally and thinking about advanced technology all day. So it's my way of kind of yin and yang balancing.
That's a perfect yin and balance. Means last time when I rattled this thought with my wife, like, hey, can we have some goats in the backyard? And like she was like, who is feeding all these thoughts to you? I just said, like, Sir Jonathan, it's not me. But eventually she threw some code to me that our subdivision doesn't accept goats, and so I cannot do that. But you really are a goat. For the audience, goat means the greatest of all time. So we have, yeah, because some people will say, like, why is he calling his distinguished speaker a goat? But I think a goat is stronger than a lion, I think, unless somebody invents a long form from lion. So I think without further ado, let's jump over to you. You already are scaring your screen. Let's go with your line of thought, understand the world from how you see it, and then we will jump back in the Q&A. So it's over to you, Jonathan.
Great, excellent, thank you. Yeah, great talk so far to both Jacqueline and Jim. That was great. Really thinking about kind of personal introspection, but then also looking out above and around us. And I think this will be an interesting, different piece of that puzzle in looking at really how we as humans can influence where our space goes today. So the talk is going to be around artificial intelligence and product connectivity. So as you heard, Jonathon Baugh, I work with Slalom Detroit, where I lead our customer strategy and experience design team. Personally, my background, I really kind of cut my teeth in design and UX back in the mid to late 90s with web design and kind of moved from there into digital products, getting into some of the earlier kind of connected product design. And now share as a consultant in all manners of industries and spaces where customer experiences and human interactions interface with digital capabilities. And as you heard, I'm also a hobby farmer. There's my goats in the background of that picture. I will also shamelessly say, normally I have a much bigger beard. I did shave it down for Movember. So I'm raising funds for men's mental health awareness and suicide prevention. So if you're interested in finding out more, check out my LinkedIn. I just made another post about it. And there's fun videos of me shaving my beard in all different ways this past.
Jonathan, there's a perfect plug-in, but I think also to mention today, 19th November, also happens to be a Men's Day. So it's not just the health, but just like we have a Women's Day. But finally, poor men, we also have a day. Thank God we have some role in the existence. Over to you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to kind of talk a little bit about my frame of reference and how I look through the world. So I mentioned back in the mid 90s, I was doing web design, and you have to think of what technology looked like back then. For me, it really was technology in one part of the world and people on another side, and they didn't really know how to talk the same language. And I wanted to build my career as being that bridge between people and technology, whether it was through tech support or bringing, introducing the World Wide Web to the world and how the internet could really change what technology did for people. But it wasn't until I got into the startup game that I really understood there was another leg to that stool: business. And actually, I refer to it as my Triforce of power. So with that kind of people, technology, business, I think where the intersection of that is where design really sits. And I'll use a definition from one of my idols, John Maida. Design makes solutions, art makes questions. But really, for the frame today, I'm talking about how we design solutions in the space of smart, connected, and as well as AI and even some of the other kind of terms around that. So definition-wise, artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning, there are many other various intricacies of that field. I'm going to kind of lump them all together for the purposes of today. Ultimately, what I'm referring to is computers that are able to make decisions, computers that are learning, that are taking in different information, and ultimately creating knowledge through that. On the side of smart and connected, this could be any sort of IoT device. It could range from everything from cell phones and personal devices like watches in the picture here, all the way up to entire infrastructures that are smart and connected. So think of a smart city or a smart building. So with those as kind of the definitions, at least working definitions for today, I'd like to dive in. And when Jeevak had asked me if I would participate in this, first of all, I was honored, but then I kind of asked myself, okay, great, well, what should I talk about, right? And as any good designer, I kind of had to break that down, and I asked myself first, okay, well, what problem am I trying to solve? I've been in various consulting roles. I've led strategies around smart connected products, and I figured I probably have a lot of knowledge that I could share. So really that understanding was my goal for the talk. But as a designer, it's not just about designing things that are provocative. That would be art. What I wanted to do was then say, okay, well, how do I know that I've been successful in this talk? So I then wanted to make sure that I focused on some actionable lessons, some things that each of you on the call today could take back with you. So I'm going to break my talk up into two sections, one focusing on the understanding and kind of mega trends of this space, and then focus the last half really on coming up with some actionable activities or insights, things that you can take and really try to practice and change maybe how you as a designer think about or even engage, whether it's smart connected products, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. So this might be a little more practically focused than the last talk, but I think there's a lot of interesting overlaps and similarities when you start thinking about possibilities and where things go. So with the mega trends, you know, there's a lot happening, and this is a very dynamic, changing space. So I'm just going to try to pull out some key insights and try to weave them together a little bit. The first big mega trend, I think, is around device proliferation. So I'm going to try and get a little interactive here and ask you guys to type in the chat what your guess as to how many smart devices, IoT devices, etc., you think there are out in the world right now. So we'll see how this works. I got to get the chat pulled up and all that, but I want to see what people's guesses are. And just go ahead and start typing them in there.
Out in the world, that's it.
In the world, yeah. Okay, I'm seeing one is 4 billion, 10,000. Keep coming, keep coming.
8 billion. Oh my God, I was way down.
8 billion, 15 billion, 1 billion, 100 billion.
I think in the words of Jim,
100 million.
It's billions and billions. Wow.
Okay, great. Yeah, exactly. So interestingly enough, when you made that comment, that was actually what came to mind. Awesome. Well, the estimate that I was able to find, and I got to tell you, these numbers change dramatically year to year, is 31 billion. So 31 billion devices are out there right now in this kind of smart connected IoT space. So without a doubt, the number of devices is just growing at an exponential rate. And again, you can look at these trends, you can look at the predictions, and these numbers are going to go up, 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 up. So as designers, I think we have to recognize they're there. And furthermore, they're ubiquitous. So here's my next little interactive quiz. I'm going to take about 10 seconds, pause, look around your desk, your office, wherever it is that you're dialing in from, and try to count the number of what you would consider smart or connected devices you have just sitting around you. And again, go ahead and type that in the chat when you've got a number. I'm going to do the same because I forgot what my number was, and it always changes depending on what room I'm in. All right, I've got 7, 3, 8, 4, 3, 5, 5. Yeah, I have 4 right now, and that's only because I'm in a temporary office. If I was in my normal office, I think I'm up to like 10 or 12.
Somebody has 8 also. Erika has 8. Alexander Sarbansky, you have 8. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. 7, sure. So that gives you an idea of how ubiquitous they are. They're all around us. And again, these are just going to continue to evolve and continue to mature. So one of the reasons that we're seeing more and more is the cost of these devices are plummeting, right? If you look at the background on this slide, I have a couple of Arduinos, and you can also think of Raspberry Pis and, you know, kind of other little easy maker, if you will, microprocessors and controllers. And you can get them for, you know, anywhere from $15, $20, $25, or you can go to some really cheap offerings, things like Beagle boards, ESP32s. You can get some of these for less than $1 and smart and connect just about anything. So as we start to see these costs go down and the number of devices go up, more and more applications are going to pop up, and this is just going to continue. This isn't going to slow down at all. One of the neat aspects, though, about this device proliferation is it's not just controllers, right? There's also a tremendous amount of increasing number of inputs that you can have. So we thought of maybe in the early days, if you will, of a connected device. You might have audio, or you might have a GPS. Maybe you've got some cameras and gyroscopes and things like that, accelerometers. Well, now you start stepping back and thinking about how frequently these devices are being used and what all the new sensors that they're constantly creating. They're creating new opportunities for this technology to have an impact on daily life. So you have autonomous vehicles that are using radar, they're using LiDAR, they're using infrared even. They're using all sorts of technology to try to solve a problem that's never been solved before. How do you teach a computer to recognize and be aware and make decisions of the world and real-time interactions around it? So I think that's pretty exciting. You can look at things like moisture or brightness sensors, and these are being applied on things that you might never consider. If you were ordering a container, a shipping container from overseas that has whatever expensive material inside, why not throw a $5 sensor that can tell you if it's been opened, or can tell you if the moisture inside that container went up or down in that voyage? That might have a tremendous impact on the fidelity of whatever that material or product that you just bought. So even if your product isn't smart and connected, the way that it is shipped, the way that it is packaged, the way that it is manufactured is very likely done so in that kind of smart and connected world. And that's often because of the increasing capability around these sensors and inputs. But it doesn't end just with inputs, of course. Then you have to think of, you know, as a good computer person does, about outputs, right? So certainly we're seeing audio and visual cues from smart and connected devices get better. We're seeing an ever evolving display screen, right? We're looking at holographics, at flexible screens, even heads up displays on automobiles that have been around for, quite frankly, decades. But we're starting to see these technologies really take shape on the audio and visual way. But there are a lot of other capabilities, right? We're seeing haptics. And as designers, we're starting to learn that there are drawbacks to overusing haptics, right? Who all has maybe heard of or even probably experienced phantom vibration syndrome, right? That's when you're convinced that your phone just buzzed in your pocket, even though your phone's sitting on the table in the other room. So these are things that we've got to be aware of as we're building and as we're taking advantage of this device proliferation. There's going to be a significant impact in how we solve problems as designers. And there's both good things of new ways that we can engage, but there's also new design challenges that we have to be aware and work around. The other point that I'll make about the outputs of these devices are very rarely do you have a truly standalone smart connected device or a standalone AI or a machine learning element. Often there are multiple of these systems connected together that are feeding back and forth. So it might be the output of one becomes the input for the next, and there might even be feedback loops in there. So as designers, this is a ever increasing complexity that I think we have to consider and try to wrap our heads around. So device proliferation is a very happening trend. It's not going away. It's going to get more challenging, and it's going to be a bigger space. So I think this is a really important one to kind of kick off with. But I also want to talk about the expanding applications that we're seeing. And I don't mean like apps on a mobile phone. I mean how these smart connected devices or how machine learning are being applied and are impacting our lives, whether it's in a professional setting or a personal setting. So with personal, you know, we're seeing so much more than just cell phones, smartwatches. We're seeing consumer goods, things like smart shoes or smart clothing. We're seeing connected elements that are even a part of our body, right? The whole idea of cybernetics. You could even go back and say things like hearing aids, which maybe weren't really a smart and connected thing, now almost all come with Bluetooth so that they can sync right into your phone. This is just the start of, I think, a really interesting and huge area for exploration and experimentation. But of course, when you start talking about personal, then you think about your home, right? And obviously with home and smart devices, the picture here is, of course, a Nest. I think there's no shortage, especially as we come to holiday season. You know, every store that makes anything along these lines probably has sales on Alexas, Google Homes, Nests, Rings, you know, you name it, right? They're all out there, and these are going to be probably even more integrated in new construction and in new homes and in home renovations as you move forward, right? I think back to college days when my buddy and I moved into the house that we were in for undergrad, and we literally had to do an assessment of how do we run Ethernet cable from one end of the house to the other because we needed that, right? And now, of course, with Wi-Fi, that's not so much, but I think of the newer version of that is going to be things like, what if you're renting a house? How do you slap on a smart sensor or a smart device, whether it's a Ring or a Nest? So these are things that are going to bleed out of the technology design space and into things like interior design space and home design. And certainly Jacqueline, I think, could probably talk a lot about some of the applications in the home as well. So I mentioned home, but spaces in general is a concept that is also exploding as far as how AI and machine learning especially can influence. You think of COVID and contact tracing. Here in the state of Michigan, right, up until our current lockdown, you know, every restaurant that you went into and sat down, they would have to track your phone number and your name so that they could do a contact tracing in a very manual way. Well, imagine if when you go into that restaurant, they automatically know that it's you, whether it's facial recognition, or maybe you know, have a ID handshake from your cell phone in a proximity manner, right? There are so many ways that that space can become smart connected. And it's not just COVID. I mean, you're looking at smart parking as something that is a really intelligent and valuable way. When you talk about congestion in a downtown area, think about EV vehicles and charging stations and how that network needs to all be connected to maximize the benefit in that space. Smart buildings can save a tremendous amount of money and be way more energy efficient if they have that knowledge of what's happening in the different spaces and how usage and heating needs vary, and then making decisions based upon that. So smart spaces, I think, is one that really has massive, massive potential. And I can tell you there are a lot of companies trying to crack that nut, but I would argue that one's one that we haven't even scratched the surface of yet. Another application that is getting a lot of visibility, but hasn't really exploded yet, I think, is healthcare. Now, this could be anything from one of the startups that I worked on, a smart hospital bed, where when you call the nurse, it knows what you need and it can communicate information back and forth and support the triage of the patient through the device and knowledge transfer there. But it also can be things outside of the hospital. Certainly there's smart surgical rooms and all that, but imagine if a patient that has medical conditions needs to track things. There are all sorts of examples where having that knowledge or having that data captured automatically, right? I mean, even on your smartphone, it tracks everything from movement to heartbeat. You think of a Fitbit, tracks your sleep patterns and all of that. Those are healthcare devices. There's a couple of companies out there right now trying to track toothbrush and how you actually brush your teeth. So Beam Dental out of Ohio, where they will, I'm going to butcher what their actual business model is, but ultimately what they're saying is if we can track your brushing habits, we will adjust your insurance for your dental insurance based on those sorts of usage. So healthcare is going to, again, explode in this space. The last one I'll talk about is industrial and manufacturing. Everything in manufacturing is about yield, right? How you put in X and you get out Y. And the higher proportion of Y to the X that you put in, the more profitable your business is going to be, the more sustainable you are. You're not throwing away waste. So much can be determined way better than humans can by having the right sensors, the right data, the right measurements, and tweaking and adjusting that process throughout. We can also use this technology in those sorts of applications to create much safer environments. So if you think of an industrial mine where you have these huge machines that are the size of houses to drill and bore and move rocks and this and that, yeah, if you've got people walking around in there, it can be an extremely dangerous space. But if you can, they call it lights out, if you can turn the lights out, have everything be smart and connected and automated, it knows exactly where to pull up the dump truck, where to move the shovels to load it with, where to put the drill, when the drill is ready to move. All of these things can be coordinated in a very tightly coupled way. Along those lines, it's projected that as much as 40% of all IoT devices are actually going to live in that industrial and manufacturing space. So really interesting place that I think as designers, we've got to pay attention to. I'll pause really quick because I do see a couple of comments in the chat there, and I totally appreciate the concern over Big Brother and what does all this data do. It certainly creates a huge need for the ethics and the privacy to be open conversations where the government, I think, takes a step towards leadership and really helping establish what that should look like and how to manage that. It's a whole separate talk and one that I am woefully underqualified to get into, but I just wanted to acknowledge that is a big issue when you start talking about all these smart connected.
If you're going with the questions, there's one more, not a question, just an element about in New Zealand, they have really used the contact tracing to reduce the spread of COVID. So yeah, big data is a big concern, and that might be another topic, but there are elements and resources which can be used to tackle some of these big, hairy problems that you are facing with. You're right.
Yeah. So I'm going to step into.
If you're okay, Jonathan, if you're okay with having questions in between.
Yeah, please. Let's jump into
the last slide where you were talking about industrialization and manufacturing and yield, and the way we explained that, very was articulate about the machine knowledge or the AI knowledge of the coordination and integration of what needs to happen, all those minor tweaks which are needed to get the yield, right? Because once the product has been designed, then it's the profit margin from an industry perspective. Would that make us eventually dumb? I mean, the question comes like, if you're seeing Wall-E, like the machines are telling us what to do, and I'm just going to go back and spend my time on TikTok.
Yeah.
After 50 years, after 100 years, what do you think?
It's a really interesting conversation, and I think it's one that we should be having, right? I'm not going to pretend that I have the answers. I mean, my opinion is there is no shortage of creativity. There is no shortage of vision, of planning, of understanding that is going to be required to create that sort of a world. And even then, there's also going to be so much around supporting and maintaining a system that maybe is, I think what you're getting at is kind of one that's a more self-sustainable industry, right? Now, if we get to that kind of Valhalla, if you will, where the machines run everything and we just get to sit around and be lazy all day, great. You know what? We get to look at stars. We get to find our purpose, right? You get to look at birds. You get to write poetry. I mean, yeah, exactly, right, Shivak? This is your dream come true.
That will be really my dream come true. And I would love to go with that. I mean, an interesting choice of words about the Valhalla rather than I would say, the world of utopia. That's a pretty good word, actually. I like that. To fight your way through it. It's not just going to happen. Because when you say about utopia, it just says like it's going to happen. No, we have to fight for it. Maybe another question here from Connor, in the same context. Are you worried that implementing AI into design practices, maybe like yours and ours too, will take out the human touch of the final product?
That's a great question. I think that, and in a couple of slides, I'll get to this, that I really think we have to look at smart connected AI, machine learning, all of these things as new tools in our toolbox. I've always kind of looked at design and user experience and kind of this space that we sit in as one where we have a really unique set of tools. And we've got to decide which tool is the right one for the problems that we're trying to solve. Yep. And I think this just is now putting new tools in our toolbox, right? And I'll kind of come back to that metaphor in a little bit.
Let's go forward with your presentation.
But that's a great question of how that influences design and how we use that to support but not override the human element. So great question. And yeah, thank you for the comments and the questions. Let's keep them coming. The last mega trend that I'm going to talk about is a little bit different than the previous two. But I think this is an important one to acknowledge and to talk about. And this is what I see as the value of knowledge. So, I'll kick this off by talking about the maturity I think that we have of a society and our relationship to technology. So jump back to 2007. That was when the iPhone was first announced, right? Man, that seems like a long time ago. And I mean, to be fair, 13 years. Again, anyone have any guess on how many iPhones have been sold in those 13 years? You can type in the chat if you want. It's an insanely high number. I'll tell you that much. But the idea, yeah, not quite gazillions, but it's about 2 billion is what Tom said. It's about 2.5 billion right now. That's crazy when you think about, we're a little over 7 billion people on the planet, right? Now, if I go in my closet, I've probably got 5 iPhones stacked up, right? Like, okay, that explains a little bit. But that journey of maturity and how that forethought of putting a smart device in your pocket, right? Think about before that, you had a BlackBerry, maybe, right? Or a Palm Pilot or something like that, where they basically were just trying to be a platform for that information, right? Of calendars, of email, and phone calls. Like those were, in my mind, kind of what those apps did. Maybe some task management as well. And then you kind of had this evolution into the Web 2.0. You had the modernization of the smartphone, right? And Web 1.0, even as a designer, I always talked about was like a brochure. It was a digital brochure that you could update in real time and get out to people. But Web 2.0 really got back to that input-output that I was talking about before, where you could have data presented and you could input data back in, and you could kind of have a little bit of an interaction. Well, as it's evolved, now we look at mobile applications, enterprise web apps, and how much that has matured in our access to that information and the ability to do things with that information. So that's the next one, is really thinking about how we want to make informed decisions as close to the point of impact as possible. So way back in the day, right, you would have to go consult old data in the library, in books, on paper, and then you would make your decision, and then you would go out. Well, now we're pulling that information, we're pulling all of that data, we're aggregating it in a way never before, right there when you're making that decision. So I'll use an example. If you're going to go buy a car, right, 20 years ago, you went to the library, you checked out consumer reports, you took paper, you maybe used the photocopy machine, you did all your homework, then you went to the dealership, and then you went through that process. Now, there are companies that want you to do it all from your couch on your phone because they'll give you everything right then and there, including financing. So they've brought so much of that interaction right to where that decision point is being made. So I'm going to use an infographic that I absolutely love. And I don't think it's perfect, but I do find that it just aligns on the points of where data is just, we've got data points, right? That's all the sensor knows how to do. Then you've got to make sense of what that is. So then you've got to tag that data. Okay, that still probably hasn't gotten into the true AI machine learning. Okay, when you start to connect meaningfully those different tagged information points, now you're starting to get to that knowledge. I think that's really where I see kind of that smart connected, the insights is really where the AI or machine learning is going to make a recommendation. And I would argue kind of that wisdom is where it's actually just taking that action without even presenting it back to a human. And I think that's where some of these comments in the chat and some of the conversations that we're having, probably get nervous is around automated decision making. But again, if we can pull those decisions up, even if we're just presenting the choice to the human, or maybe we're making it on the back end, I think that's really where that value of knowledge is. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what I mean by that. So if we take the front door of a house, and I say, what is the value of knowledge about your front door? People probably would look at you funny if you asked them that 5 years ago. But now, right, with things like Ring and all sorts of, connected onto your smartphone security systems, people can look on their phone from anywhere in the world and know what's happening in their front yard or at their porch. You fast forward to our heavy reliance on delivery, especially in quarantine, and there's a tremendous amount of value in that. Before people would have said, well, if somebody's knocking at my door, I'll go check who it is. Now you don't have to answer because you know who it is on your phone, or you might be able to take other actions based on what your phone is telling you. So I think that's an interesting kind of lightweight example. I'm going to get into a fairly economic example. I mentioned kind of industrial uses and manufacturing and all of that around yield. The kind of grand vision for smart and connected in a manufacturing space is preventative maintenance. So if you can tell when your $1 million machine is about to break down, and you can prevent that breakdown by intervening and providing some maintenance, very likely that prevention is going to save money on a broken repair. It's going to save time because the time to repair something that's broken can be significantly longer by the time you order the replacement part. You have to have everything shut down. Then you got to service it and pull out all the broken things. Did it do any damage to the machine and all of that? Well, if you could have just intervened, done maintenance and flicked everything back on, not only did you not lose that time, which you should be, producing output, and you save the money on whatever those repairs are, but you also probably saved the product that was in flight in your process. A lot of manufacturing, if you've got to do a shutdown, you might waste all of that that's in queue for various reasons. So there's a huge cost savings value in having that smart connected. And it's not just preventative maintenance of then being able to jump in, but imagine if you also had machines that could slow down. So if you're, for example, slicing salami, imagine, we've got some dogs saying hi in the background. But if you're slicing salami and it's going at near light speed, right? If all we have to do is slow down the slicing while all we've got to do is slow down that blade while it's getting duller, but we can still get yield, and then we know when the optimal time to swap it out is, that can be a tremendous cost saving. So there's a huge potential there. And that's because we've brought that decision making right to where the impact of that is happening. And again, that might not even be a human that can make that decision because they can't process all those data points. The last example, I'm going to go back to a healthcare one that I started to allude to earlier. Folks with diabetes that have an insulin pump, that can be a tremendously challenging interaction of managing that pump, of relating to it, of working with it, even just getting the right data out of it and being able to make sense of, this loud device that beeps. So there's a lot of conversations. There's even a fair group of makers right now that are working on ways to have a smart connected insulin pump that they can monitor on their own. So now you want to kind of talk about that cybernetic implant. Effectively, that's what it would be. And it's something that you would be able to manage on your phone and kind of be responsible, be the CEO of your own healthcare through connected devices that are literally plugged into your body, administering medication in real time, not locked in by some algorithm that had been written previously, but in a way that you can interact with and can customize. So really interesting examples, I think, that pull back decisions to that point of impact. So my hypothesis here, I've got a puppy here that is trying to instigate the older dog. My hypothesis here is that smart products are valuable in solving problems when you can make better decisions with better information. This is not rocket science. This is, garbage in, garbage out, like programming 101 from the 70s, right? But we need to think about that, and we need to center ourselves around what is the information that we need to make those better decisions. So with that, I'll kind of flip to the actionable lessons part and kind of wrap up here pretty quick. I want to leave these with you to ponder, because I recognize everybody on the call probably comes from, different interpretations or aspects of what design is. You may or may not have any interaction with the design side of smart connected and AI and machine learning, but I can pretty much guarantee everybody on the call is a recipient or is engaging and interacting with these sorts of experiences. So with that, the challenge that I'll say is, okay, are there new ways to achieve your desired outcome, right? Step back a little bit from saying this is the product or this is the activity or this is the solution that I've been using for years, and say, what's the actual outcome, right? So in the case of the human who is battling diabetes, it's not about, well, I need a better insulin pump. It's actually, no, I need a better way to manage my insulin levels. And can we solve that through better information and through better choices and better actionable insights, right? The other one is the concept that I started to talk about a little bit of invisible decisions, right? So are there ways that we can use machine learning, that we can use AI? Maybe we just use a more sophisticated rules engine, right? Like, I don't want to get caught up in what that term or those terms are, but can we make decisions for our users, for the humans at the end of the design, at the solution level? Can we make better decisions for them that they don't even need to be aware of because of this information, because of this connectivity, because of the new inputs that we can gather? Maybe it's even external data sources that we're pulling in to help inform why we're going to make that decision. And then that's, I think, where we can really take advantage of kind of a machine intelligence. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, right, as designers, we have a lot of different tools in our toolbox. We've now got to be proficient in these new tools. And the good news is we don't have to do it alone, right? Let's collaborate with our technology partners. Let's really try to understand who needs to be in the room when we're having, these kind of activities and sessions where we're looking at what is the outcome we're trying to achieve, what is the challenge that we're trying to overcome. I'm going to read this question because this looks pretty interesting. Where do you draw the line between qualitative and quantitative information for connected devices and their use? And how does AI make decisions using both? That's an awesome question, Chris. I think as a good designer, I always try to balance qualitative and quantitative. Coming from a UX background, especially, I've always described it as kind of this balance between art and science. We want to be a data-driven design. And I think that's something that we need to carry forward as well in this space. So if you're looking for a computer to make a decision exclusively on quantitative data, you have to expect those sorts of results. And maybe there are ways that we can then pull in other sorts of data to understand the qualitative impact as well. So I don't know if I answered your question correctly or exactly, but I think there is that balance, and we can come back to that. I know we're coming close on time, so I got one more block. The last thing that I do want to ask all of you is to kind of challenge yourself. Step back and think about in your daily lives where you might, gain benefit from having kind of that smart and connected. I'll give you a personal example. And Jivak mentioned I live on this, homestead in the woods. I'm a big hunter, and I love sitting outside and just spending time in the woods, whether I see a deer or not. Right now, if I do get a deer, I this weekend shot a deer with an arrow. Right, that deer ran. Man, how cool would that have been if that arrow had a GPS that turned on the minute its acceleration from being fired was, right? Like that would have been a thing that I would have paid it, $100 for on the spot, $1,000 for whatever, right? So it's those sorts of things where there are benefits, there are ways where we can really take advantage of smart connected, but even more so, let's challenge ourselves to think about, and some of these questions are great thought provokers of, okay, well, what is an appropriate way to make a decision about someone's healthcare, right? Or what is a way to maybe change the game in that manufacturing or in the house or in the office or whatever? COVID has presented us with what feels like infinite number of challenges. Awesome. Challenges are opportunities. Now let's look at how these new tools can help us with that. So with that, I will say thank you very much for the time. I love the questions that have been coming in. I hope I've done them justice, but love to dive in more and answer anything that you have. You got my email at the bottom, LinkedIn, and let's keep this conversation going.
I never knew, Jonathan, you had a twin brother who had a long mustache.
That's right. That was one of the fun Movember poses there.
Just like the waxing and the waning moon, we can see Jonathan from all the angles. That's beautiful. I just love the way you chunked it in three kind of in buckets and trying to understand and extract the value. I think the way we are talking about when people say, let's say in the magazines like data-driven design, no, data is just a starting point. Then the journey from the data to information to knowledge to insights, and then accumulating that in the part of wisdom as a part of your backbone of the design process and going forward. That's always beautiful. There are so many things. I do not know whether you have the preview or not, but from Slalom, any case studies or something where right now you're saying about in a very good utopian element, anything they can share of a product or a solution that you achieved this very well?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I got to think what I can share right now.
That's always the problem nowadays because it's what you can share. So don't get yourself into trouble. We can always bring you back next year.
I will say this much. I think one of the elements that I've seen really strongly with a lot of our clients is when you start talking about data and big data and making decisions and analytics around it and even getting into something like machine learning. I often recommend to think about it in a couple of phases. So the creation of the model is one phase, but then the running and operating and continual learning of the model is a whole nother thing. And that probably comes back to Chris's question around qualitative versus quantitative. To create good, safe, constructive machine models or AI, whatever you want to call it, is a very specific set of skills. And you've got to tune those models. and you've got to work on them and make sure that you don't have a negative impact, right? I mean, there's a number of just atrocious case studies about creating racist AIs and things like that. And, you know, I'm sure we've all read about them and heard about them. So that creation process is something that, again, the ethics, I think, comes through really strongly, and the importance of treating that with reverence and really respecting that process, and then making sure you got it right. Whereas then the running and leveraging that model, I think, is a very different activity or different set of skills and how you interact with that and build products and solutions around that. So I would just say that that's a really important distinction that at Slalom we try to walk all of our clients.
Please, and you invoke the element of ethics over there, and I think it can. You said we can go back to the basic of garbage in, garbage out of the 70s programming, but even going back to some of the articles written by Isaac Asimov, one of the futurist thinkers, like if you really still follow the first three laws of robotics about what the machine can do for you and not harm you and not other, it just goes back to those three distinct rules for machines. And yeah, there can be some robots and machines designed for the military which will have a specific purpose, but coming back to the civilian world, if we follow these basic elements, I think we have a very good way to see forward. I will still try to be respectful of time. I know Tom is waiting there, you know, with way more patience as such. But in the last bin, you mentioned about the invisible decisions, and you said, in a very good way, can we make decisions for the humans, for them? And that's a pretty interesting element, because there's lots of parallels between what you are doing in the technology world and what we are doing in the industrial design world. We means just the designers community, because it's doing it. We always say we want to go user-centric design,
Yep.
but user-centric is one. Then the onus of designers to now overlap that with the designs of the society, the culture, and even of the biosphere. So we always have to make sure, hey, Mr. Client, we want to make sure you have to make money. We want to make sure the end product has to be happy to reach to the outcome that they want, the exactly word that you have used. But we also have to make sure that we owe, I would say, ourselves of what we have learned for 2, 3, 4 years in the design school, to make sure how are we still to reduce the pollution, the burden on this Mother Earth. So, but coming back to your world of technology, I think AI would be a pretty good tool to let us know that, guys, you're doing it for this. How about these decisions based on the collectivity of humans? I would always call this not just human-centered design studio. Now we are trying to look out and try to readdress the notion by saying humanity-centered design studios. It's how you are going to buy it, but it's going to affect everybody.
Yeah, there's one last point, maybe, if I could make, just kind of building off that. I stayed pretty clear away from smart cars and connected vehicles, even though that's a topic that I've spent a lot of my career in and actually given a number of talks on. I will bring them in though here and say we are making decisions already where cars, for example, are making decisions for us, and you can't deny that. And I think that's when, you know, you kind of have to revisit the big brother conversation and say, yeah, it's easy to step back and kind of point at, oh, in the future that AI that's going to run everything, that's scary. But the fact is, we already have AI that's making decisions that are life or death for us, and especially if you talk, you know, autonomous vehicles, right? The do no harm, right? Rule number one, do no harm to humans. Like, guess what, right? There are published case studies of what happens if you're an autonomous vehicle. You've got a family of 4 in the car, and there are pedestrians in front of you, and choose A or B. Only one gets to live, right? So you can't have a machine that shuts down and says, well, I can't make that decision, and then everybody dies, right? So these are huge, nasty, hairy challenges that we're already solving and we're already working towards. And certainly that's one area where you could go, you know, very, very deep. And there are entire conferences talking about
and you're right, means unbeknownst to us, we right now are guided by these hands of AI, even though you might be acknowledging them, or it might not be might be knowingly done. And I think maybe one last comment, question kind of a thing. I hope not just you, but everybody on the panel has seen the Netflix documentary Social Dilemma. Maybe we can spend 1 or 2 minutes on that, but it is really an element of what you touched upon, Jonathan. I would like to hear, let's say, your summary for that, if at all. Like, no matter what, some of these algorithms, if you're going to buy something on Amazon and that they keep on stalking you and buying and projecting the same thing wherever you go, hey, it's good for paid for advertisement and all those things. But I think as designers, what we also try to do is, we know now we are good, bad, or otherwise, in a way, forcefully getting in expressions or say impressions from that bubble. And sometimes as designers, you, me, and technology, we have to forcefully go out of that bubble into elements where you need to be inspired, provoked, or get different stimuli to react to, rather than the AI things that are in a way just getting your eyeballs on the same thing. If I just say I want to buy a camping chair, why would I buy it right now? But I want to buy one next entire week. I'm haunted by those ads from everywhere, from Alibaba and Amazon and Yahoo. So it's where I think the onus is on us, how we make those decisions to genuinely go and reach out to some other sources, rather than just always saying, hey, Alexa, or hey, Siri, what is this? The act of trying to find an answer to that kind of a nebula of a question actually helps you go and find some other things, which help in further, I would say, grounding in the context, rather than just going myopically in and coming back. No good product can be designed in isolation and not necessarily in that myopic world. So maybe in the last comment about social dilemma and what's next.
Yeah, I'll actually, we've got two great comments, I think, in the chat that really, I think, kind of dovetail onto that nicely. So Sherry was talking about, who ultimately makes the decision, and that's kind of the dilemma. Katrina is talking about, a fear of loss of control, and who really has the control. I think those are great points, and I think that kind of hits on what you were covering there, Jiva. The challenge, and this comes back to that last part that I said, is challenge yourself. As designers, that's our decision, right? And we need to be responsible to help decide how, when we're designing that product, that solution, that system, whatever that might be, where does it make those calls? And yeah, Alexander says that, yeah, Mercedes has already made their decision that they protect the car occupant, right? Like, yeah, that's their business. That's what they needed to do. And I think they're totally justifiable in doing that, right? Otherwise, why would you pay, for a premium car if it's going to kill you, right? Because you're not the person, right? So I think those are things where we've got to case by case really kind of look at and try to do our best to determine what is the right answer. And sometimes it's going to be invisible decisions that we trust to the AI. And quite frankly, we can usually be fairly reasonably confident that it's not going to harm us, follow that first rule. And other times we might decide that, yeah, that's a decision that it has to come to a human. And that's probably how we then design the system is, okay, when is that choice made? And do they have the appropriate data and ability to make that choice then?
Awesome. Jonathan, again, as you know, this has been real pleasure. I love the way you are storytelling, even about the world of AI. Intelligence also can be told in the story. Thank you again for your time. Please try to stay on for the next speaker also. But thank you again for coming on our show. And we will keep in touch. One day I have to visit your homestead, and
I was gonna say when
click the owls that are in your backyard. So
barn owls, we'll get you out here for them for sure.
Yes, I need to do that. Awesome. Thank you again. You can feel free to just be on the panel and just unvideo and mute yourself.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the wonderful comments.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.